The first thing Verathkas felt when consciousness returned was cold. Not the cold of vacuum, not the brittle, absolute zero he had trained for, the kind that stripped heat from metal in seconds and turned blood into dark crystal. This was a softer cold, the kind that came from stone walls and recycled air and something else he could not yet name. He felt it on the back of his neck first, then along his shoulders, then all the way down his spine, and he understood without opening his eyes that he was lying on his back on a flat surface, and that the surface was not the deck of the Kethalar, and that the Kethalar was most likely gone. He opened his eyes. The ceiling above him was low and curved, poured from some pale material he did not recognize. There were lights set into it, soft, yellowish, nothing like the blue-white strips of a warship interior. The air tasted wrong, too much nitrogen, too thick with moisture, a faint biological trace he associated with the enemy. Human. He was in a human structure. He tried to move his right arm. It was restrained. His left, also restrained. His legs, both restrained. He turned his head and saw a single strap across his chest, thin, but he did not doubt its strength. He was not chained. He was not in a cell with bars. He was lying on what appeared to be a medical surface, and someone had placed a blanket over him from the waist down, and the blanket was warm. He stared at the ceiling for a long time. The Kethalar had been a fast-strike vessel, 6-man crew, dispatched to the outer perimeter of the contested zone to disrupt supply lines. They had done this successfully for 9 cycles before the human craft found them. He did not remember the engagement clearly. There had been a proximity detonation, the kind that sent shockwaves through the hull and scrambled every system simultaneously, and then he remembered nothing until now. He did not know if the others had survived. He calculated his situation methodically, the way he had been trained. Captured, restrained but not harmed, at least not visibly, in a medical bay or something resembling one. No guards visible. The air was breathable. He was not in pain, which meant they had treated his injuries, which meant he had injuries he could not feel, which meant there had been drugs administered, and the drugs were still working. He closed his eyes again and listened. Beyond the walls he could hear the faint sound of machinery, air recyclers most likely, the hiss and pulse of life support. Distance suggested the room was not large but was part of a larger structure. He heard footsteps at one point, human gait. He had studied it, and then silence. Then, much later, the sound of something being set down near the door. Then the door opened. She was small, even by human standards. He had studied the species extensively during the long approach to the contested zone. Their height range, their coloring variance, their characteristic upright posture that the Keth command always described with a note of contempt, as though walking on 2 legs rather than 4 was a philosophical failing. This one had dark hair pulled back from her face and wore a plain gray uniform with no insignia he could identify. She was carrying a tray. She set the tray on the small surface beside him, and she looked at him, and she did not look afraid. He had expected fear. It was the reasonable response. He was Kethvar, a warrior caste, larger than most of his kind, and even restrained on a medical surface, he was aware of the impression he made. He had watched human soldiers flinch from that impression. This one looked at him the way someone might look at a problem they were actively working to solve. She said something in her language. He understood it. He had not told them this, but he understood approximately 60% of spoken human standard, enough to follow simple exchanges, not enough to be confident in complex ones. She had said, "I know you're awake. Your vital signs changed about 20 minutes ago." He said nothing. She picked up a small device from the tray and checked something on it and set it back down. She was not afraid of him. She was not performing calmness as a tactic. She was simply not afraid, and he did not know what to do with that. She said, "You have 2 cracked ribs and a hairline fracture in your left orbital plate. We set them. The bone knit paste your species uses is different from ours, so I improvised, but the scans look okay. You've been unconscious for about 37 hours. He did not respond. She said, I'm not going to tell you that you're safe because I don't know if that's true. I'm not in command here. What I can tell you is that while you're in my medical bay, I will treat you the same way I would treat anyone. A pause. That's all I've got. She picked up the tray and left. That night's station cycle, which had no relationship to any real night on the airless moon outside, he heard her working. The sounds were intermittent. The hiss and click of medical equipment, the scrape of a stool, once a low sound of frustration that was clearly not meant to be heard. He lay in the dark and listened, and found he was cataloging her sounds the way he cataloged everything in a new environment. Not for threat assessment, not entirely, but with the particular attention that his training had taught him to give to anything that might become relevant. He thought about the honor marker on the shelf that he had not yet seen clearly, but had registered in his peripheral vision. He thought about the fact that someone in this station had kept it. He thought about the crew of the Kethalar. 6th, 3rd, 2nd. He used their mission ranks because their personal names had a grammar in his language that was not appropriate to use while their status was uncertain. He did not know if they were dead. He had run the detonation sequence in his memory several times and could not determine with certainty whether survival was possible. And the uncertainty was a particular kind of discomfort that he had learned, over years of service, to set aside and not return to until it could be resolved. He set it aside. He thought instead about the human doctor's statement, because you're injured and you need to eat. Same reason I'd feed anyone. He had been fed before. By unit medics, by station cooks, by the automated dispensers of long-haul vessels. He had been given nutrition as a matter of logistics, the maintenance of a functioning asset. That was the correct framing. He had never considered another framing until now, lying in the dark of a human medical bay with his orbital fracture aching faintly through the medication, listening to a human doctor work at the other end of a station she had been assigned to and had not chosen, on a moon she had initially hated looking at. He thought about the phrase, because you're injured. He thought about the phrase, same reason I'd feed anyone. He did not sleep for a long time. On the second day, she came back with food. He had been awake for most of those hours, running calculations. The restraints were carbon weave, rated for twice his body weight. The room had one door and no visible ventilation access large enough to be useful. He had 3 functional fingers on his right hand. The strap left that much movement. And if he could reach the latch mechanism on the strap itself, he could potentially free his torso within 40 seconds. But the left orbital fracture meant his depth perception was compromised, and a failed attempt would alert them, and he did not yet know enough about his situation to make that worth the risk. She set the tray on the surface again. On it was a cup of water and something solid he did not recognize. She said, I looked up Keth dietary requirements. This is the closest I could get from what we have. It's not right, but it shouldn't hurt you. He looked at the food, he looked at her. She said, I can try to feed you if you want, but I figured that would be embarrassing for both of us, so I'm going to loosen the right arm strap so you can manage it yourself. If you use that arm to do something other than eat, I'll have to restrain it again, and then I'll be embarrassed because it'll mean I misjudged you. She loosened the strap. He ate. The food was wrong in ways he could not fully enumerate. The texture was too uniform, the compound ratios were off, and there was an underlying sweetness that his digestive system would probably object to later. But it was food, and he had not eaten in 37 hours, and he ate it without comment. She stood by the wall and watched him with the same focused, problem-solving expression she had worn yesterday. When he finished, she tightened the strap again. She did it carefully, not roughly. She checked the tension twice with her fingers. He said in his own language, why? She looked at him, she said, I don't speak Keth, say it again slower. He said it again. She pulled a small translation device from her pocket and held it near him and said, again. He said, why? The device rendered it. She looked at the output. She put the device away. She said, because you're injured and you need to eat. She picked up the tray. Same reason I'd feed anyone. She left again. On the third day, he heard arguing. It was coming from beyond the door, and he could catch fragments of it, a male voice, clipped and angular, the kind of human speech pattern that indicated authority or the performance of authority, and her voice, lower and steadier, not backing down. The male voice said, resources and risk assessment and precedent. Her voice said, patient and my medical bay, and one phrase he caught clearly, unmistakably. You don't get to make that call in here. The arguing stopped. She came in looking exactly as she had looked every other time. No residual tension in her posture, no tightness around the eyes. She set the tray down. She checked his restraints. She checked the bone knit on his orbital plate with a small scanner and made a sound that he had come to recognize as satisfaction. He said in her language clumsily, with an accent that made her look up sharply, "The other man wants me dead." She was very still for a moment. He said, "I understand approximately 60% of your language. I did not tell you this before." She set the scanner down. She sat on the small chair beside the surface, which she had not done before, and she looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "His name is Commanding Officer Hecht. He thinks keeping a Keth prisoner is a liability we can't afford." A pause. "He's not entirely wrong. We're a long way from resupply. Resources are thin. If this situation escalates," he said, "if this situation escalates, you will need a negotiating position." She looked at him. He said, "I am Vereth Kas. I am third rank in the Keth Var. My unit carried mission-critical intelligence about the contested zone supply corridor. If I do not transmit a survival confirmation within 6 more cycles, my command will send a retrieval force." He paused. "That is a negotiating position." She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Why are you telling me this?" He looked at the ceiling. He said, "Because you fed me." Her name was Myra Solis. She had been a trauma surgeon before the war, and now she was a trauma surgeon during the war, which she described as being almost exactly the same job with a much larger variety of injuries. She had been assigned to this outpost, a deep-range monitoring station on the edge of the contested zone, 18 months ago, and she spoke about those 18 months the way his people spoke about long patrols. Flatly, with careful omissions, in a tone that communicated that the honest version of the story was not available right now. She told him this over the course of several days, not as narrative but as fragments, the way people talked when they were thinking out loud and had forgotten to stop. He gathered the pieces and assembled them the way he had been trained to assemble intelligence, patiently, without forcing. He told her, in exchange, almost nothing. Not because he was withholding strategically, though he was that too, but because the habits of his caste did not include the human practice of casual disclosure. He was Keth Var. His personal history was not a currency. It was not something traded for comfort or connection. It existed in him the way his bones existed, present, functional, not discussed. She seemed to understand this without being told. She did not push. She asked him questions that were medical in nature and left the others unasked, and he found this restful in a way he did not fully understand. On the 6th day, she removed the strap across his chest and helped him sit up. The room spun. His orbital fracture objected to the change in position. He held very still for approximately 30 seconds until the signals from his visual cortex resolved themselves, and she stood close but did not touch him, close enough that she could catch him if the dizziness became something worse. He said, "I am fine." She said, "You look terrible, but your vitals are okay." He said, "Kethvar do not look terrible." She said, "You all look the same to me." He was fairly certain this was a human joke. He had studied their humor extensively and still found it baffling, but the delivery, flat, with that slight upward shift at the corners of her mouth, matched the pattern. He said nothing. She handed him a cup of water. He drank it sitting up and looked at the room properly for the first time. It was small and functional. There was a second surface against the far wall that was clearly used for other patients, though it was empty. There were shelves of medical equipment, most of it compact and designed for field use. On one shelf, beside a row of sealed medication containers, there was something that did not belong. It was a HFY honor marker, flat, hexagonal, cast from the dark alloy that his people used for objects of significance. It was old. The surface texture had the particular wear pattern of something that had been handled many times over many years. He had not seen one outside of his own cast in his entire service life. He stared at it. She followed his gaze and was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The crew that had this station before us, they were in contact with a Keth unit for about 8 months before the war broke out. One of them brought that back." A pause. "I don't know which one. I found it in the medical supplies when I got here. It seemed like the wrong thing to throw away." He looked at her. She said, Is that something I shouldn't have?" He said, "Where did you learn its significance?" She said, "I didn't know if it had significance. I just knew it was Keth. That seemed like enough." He looked at the marker for a long time. It was not his unit's marker. The hexagonal pattern was from a unit he recognized, the Keth Sereth, a reconnaissance cast that had operated in this region before the HFY. He did not know their fate. He had not thought to wonder about it before now. He said, "The crew that were here before you, what happened to them?" She said, "They didn't make it when the contested zone expanded." He said nothing. She said, "I kept the marker because she stopped. She tried again. Because someone gave it to someone, it meant something to both of them. That seemed worth keeping." On the 7th day, she let him sit in the doorway. Not outside. The station's internal protocols did not allow that yet, and Dressel had been very clear about the limits of his authorization. But the medical bay door was keyed to open from inside, and she propped it with a supply crate, and he sat on the threshold with his legs inside and looked out into the corridor. The corridor was functional and spare. White composite walls, strip lighting, the kind of design that said this will not be beautiful but it will work. 2 crew members passed while he sat there. The first one, a young man, built lean, carrying a diagnostic tablet, saw him and stopped walking for a full 2 seconds before recovering and continuing. The second, a woman who moved with the careful efficiency of someone managing chronic pain, looked at him without stopping and said something to the wall just past his head in a tone that he did not need a translation device to understand. Myra, behind him, said quietly, "She lost her partner in the first phase of the corridor campaign. He was on a resupply run." He said, "I understand." She said, "I know you do. That's not an accusation. I want you to know that the hostility here isn't arbitrary." He said, "Hostility based on actual loss is never arbitrary." She was quiet. Then she said, "Did you have?" She stopped, and he could hear her deciding not to finish the question. He said, "A partner, you were going to ask." She said, "You don't have to answer." He said, "Among my people, the concept does not translate directly. We have unit bond, which is a specific kind of attachment formed through extended shared operation. It is not romantic in the human sense. It is," he searched for the word, "it is the knowledge that another person has adjusted their survival calculus to include you, that their threat assessment now accounts for your position in the field before they move. That in the final seconds of a decision, your continued existence is a variable in their calculation." She said, "That sounds like love." He said, "It is not what your people call love." She said, "No," but she paused. "It sounds like one of the things your people call love, even if you don't use that word." He looked at the corridor. The young man with the diagnostic tablet had stopped at the far end and was doing something that required him to face the wall, very carefully, for a conspicuously long time. He said, "The unit I lost was Keth Sareth 9th Advance. I was not bonded to any of them individually, but I trained under their commander. I studied her movement in the field for 2 years as a junior rank attachment. Her tactical decisions became a grammar. Something I thought in." He paused. "When she died, the grammar was still there. I kept thinking in it and she was no longer there to hear it." Myra was very quiet. He said, "I do not know if that is love, but I notice that I do not want to sit in the doorway of this station with your crew walking past me and consider her death as simply a resource loss." She said, "No, that's not what it is." They sat in silence for a while. The station hummed. Somewhere deep in the infrastructure, the recyclers pulsed and breathed. He said, "The young man with the tablet, he was afraid of me." She said, "Yes." He said, "And the woman?" She said she was not afraid, she was angry. He said, "The difference is significant." She said, "I know, fear might go away. Anger needs something to do with itself, or it doesn't." He said, "Your people are not naturally warlike." She said, "Most of us aren't. Some of us are, same as any species, probably." He said, "My people are trained to war. It is built into the caste structure. Some castes do not go near conflict. The Kethvar do nothing else." He paused. "I have sometimes wondered what it would be to think in a different grammar." She said, "What would it be?" He said, "I genuinely do not know. I have no reference point." She said, "Is that frightening?" He said, "No, it is." He stopped. He used the word he had used before, Veth Karath. "It has no meaning yet. It is simply a space that exists." She said, "That might be the beginning of something." He did not answer. The young man with the tablet finally finished his conspicuous wall task and walked back down the corridor, eyes forward, not looking. Varathkos watched him until he disappeared around the turn. He thought, he is 26 years old, maybe 28. He has been here for some portion of 18 months, in a station that is running short of everything, doing a job that is necessary and unrewarding and dangerous not because of enemy action, but because of the slow grind of insufficient resources. He thought, his fear of me is rational. He thought, my existence in this corridor has made his already difficult day more difficult. He thought, Myra fed me anyway. He stayed in the doorway for another hour. No one else passed. On the 8th day, Kohecht came into the medical bay. He was a tall man, straight-backed, with the efficient posture of someone who had learned to use their size as a preliminary argument. He stood at the foot of the medical surface and looked at Varathkos and said, "He's been cleared for basic movement. We're moving him to secured quarters." Myra was at her station on the far wall. She said, "He has 2 more days of bone knit monitoring. If I move him now and the orbital fracture shifts, I lose a week of asterisk." Hecht said 2 days. She said 2 days. Hecht looked at Varathkos. He said, "I'm going to be honest with you. We've passed your survival confirmation through to your command. They've acknowledged. That buys you time." He said this without warmth as a statement of logistics. It doesn't buy you comfort. When you leave medical, you leave with 1 guard at all times, no movement outside designated areas, and any intelligence request goes through me. A pause. "Do you understand?" Varathkos said, "Yes." Hecht looked at him for another moment, then he left. Myra did not say anything for a while. Then she said, "He's not a bad man, he's just scared. This whole outpost is scared. The contested zone has been expanding for 11 months and we're short on everything and no one's been resupplied." And she stopped. "I'm sorry, you don't need to know that." He said, "I already knew." She looked at him. He said, "The supply corridor disruption was my unit's mission. We were effective." He paused. "We were very effective." She sat down in the chair beside him. He noticed she did this now without deciding to, the way you did things that had become habitual. She said, "Then why are you helping us?" He said, "I am not helping you. I am calculating." She said, "What are you calculating?" He said, "Whether the war is worth what it costs." He looked at the honor marker on the shelf. The Keth unit that gave that marker to your predecessor's crew, they were reconnaissance. Their mission was intelligence, not engagement. They operated here for 8 months. Then the war began and they were ordered to engage, and they did. A pause. I knew their commander. She was the finest tactician I had studied under. She is dead now. Myra was quiet. He said, "The unit that succeeded them, the unit before mine, also dead. My unit of 6, I am the only one confirmed alive. I do not know the status of the others." He paused. "The supply corridor disruption was our 12th successful mission. We were a very good unit. We are all dead or captured anyway." She said quietly, "I'm sorry." He said, "In my culture we do not say that for the military dead. It is considered," he searched for the word, "imprecise. They died as warriors. The cause of sorrow is the waste, not the death. The sorrow is for the commanders who sent them, not the soldiers who went." She said, "We don't really separate those." He said, "I know. I have noticed this about your people. It is one of the things we do not understand about you." She said, "What are the other things?" He said, "You keep the possessions of those who cannot take them with them." He looked at the marker. "You tend to what is left behind. You grieve things that have no practical value to grieve." She said, "We call that honoring the dead." He said, "We call it inefficiency." A pause. She said, "Do you believe that?" He looked at the marker for a long time. He said, "I do not know what I believe about it. I know what I was trained to believe." On the 10th day, she walked him to the East Observation Corridor. He was allowed movement in designated areas now: the medical bay, the main corridor, the observation wing, all under guard. The guard was a young human named Dressel, who carried his weapon with the careful deliberateness of someone who had been told many times how important it was, and had not yet needed to use it in earnest. He walked 3 steps behind them and said nothing. The observation corridor was a long window cut into the outer wall of the station, looking out across the surface of the moon they were stationed on. It was a bleak landscape, gray stone and impact craters, and far on the horizon, the arc of the gas giant the moon orbited, banded in amber and rust. Myra stood beside him and looked out at it. She said, "I used to hate it. The first 6 months I couldn't stand to look at it. Everything about it felt hostile." She paused. "Somewhere around month 8 I started to see it differently. It's not hostile, it just doesn't care. There's a difference." He looked at the landscape. He said, "My people have a concept for this. The untranslatable word is something close to *Vethkarath, the condition of existing in a space that predates meaning. Before there were those who could assign significance to a thing, the thing simply was. It is a meditative concept. The point is that, when you look at something that predates all significance, you have a brief moment of seeing what existed before you needed things to mean something." She looked at him. She said, "That's beautiful." He said, "It is practical. It is used to achieve combat clarity. If you can briefly see the battlefield without meaning, you can see what is actually there rather than what you expect." She said, "And what do you actually see when you look out there?" He looked at the gray stone and the impact craters and the distant amber arc of the gas giant. He said, "A place where no one has died yet." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I need to show you something." She took him, with Dressel following, to a section of the station he had not been in before. It was at the end of the East Corridor, past the storage bays, a room that was not labeled and was accessed with a secondary override code she entered without explaining. The room was dim. She turned on a portable light and carried it inside. It was not a large room. It had the dimensions of a supply bay that had been converted to another purpose over time, and every wall of it was covered. He stood in the doorway and looked. The walls held human artifacts, photographs, printed text, small objects affixed with adhesive, but they were arranged around something else, something woven between the human objects, Keth artifacts, not the formal, official kind, the informal kind, small things, a ration wrapper with markings that identified the unit and date, a length of communication cord tied in a pattern he recognized as a Keth var acknowledgement knot, a fragment of hull alloy, polished on one edge where someone's hands had worn it smooth. Small carved figures that were not decorative, but were what his people made when they were on long assignment, and their hands needed something to do. There was a photograph, a human photograph of the crew that had been here before. 8 people, lined up in the way humans did when they documented their groups, in front of the station's outer door. And beside the photograph, somehow, someone had placed a Keth Sarath acknowledgement chip. The formal kind, the kind presented between units in recognition of shared mission or shared survival. He stood very still for a very long time. Myra said, "The crew before me left all of this. I didn't touch it." A pause. "When I got here I thought it was strange. Then I read the logs. The Keth Sarath unit and the human crew here, they were in this sector for 8 months together, on opposite sides of a cold border that hadn't turned hot yet. They shared this moon. They had to. There wasn't enough space for 2 full units to operate separately without constant contact." She stopped. "The logs say they helped each other twice. Once when the human crew lost a recycler and the Keth unit had a compatible part. Once when a Keth soldier was injured, and the human crew had the only functioning surgery bay in range." He said, "What was the human crew's designation?" She said, "Monitoring Station Kappa 7. The doctor was named Aruna Singh." A pause. "She's the one who kept the honor marker. It's in her logs." He said, "And the Keth Sarath unit?" She said, "The logs just call them the Keth unit. I don't know the designation." He said, "I do." A pause. "It was Keth Sarath 9th Advance. Their commander was named." He stopped. He said, "Her name would not translate. She was called 7th Voice in your language sometimes by the units who worked near her. She had a particular frequency to her command transmissions." Myra looked at him. He said, "She was the one I told you about, the finest tactician." He looked at the acknowledgement chip beside the photograph of the human crew. "She died in the first 2 months of the active engagement. Her whole unit. 11 days after a new set of orders arrived." Myra said nothing. He said, "I did not know about this place." He looked at the walls, at the woven human and Keth artifacts. "I did not know anyone had kept this." She said, "I kept it because the crew before me kept it and it seemed wrong to undo that." A pause. "I didn't know what I was keeping. I just knew it mattered to them." He said, "You have been tending the dead of my people." She said, "I didn't know that's what I was doing." He said, "That does not change what it is." He stood in the room for a long time, looking at the walls, at the human photographs and the Keth artifacts, woven together. At the acknowledgement chip, a dead human doctor had placed beside the image of her crew as a statement about something that had no official name in either language. He said, "In my culture there is no word for the person who tends the things of those who are gone. The role does not exist. We do not keep." She said, "We don't have a word for it either. We just do it." He said, "Why?" She said, "Because somebody should." He did not go back to the medical bay immediately. Dressel, to his credit, did not rush him. They stood in the corridor outside the unmarked room for some time, long enough that Dressel shifted his weight twice and checked his wrist display once, but he did not say anything, and Varathkos found that he was grateful for the silence in a way he could not have predicted before 17 days ago. Inside his chest, something was doing a calculation he did not have a framework for. He had been trained to assess value. Every piece of intelligence was evaluated on 2 axes, actionability and accuracy. Actionable and accurate was the highest tier. Actionable but uncertain was second. Accurate but currently inapplicable was third. The 4th tier, things that were true but could not be used, was the category that analysts called the archive and that Kethvar warriors, bluntly, called clutter. The room at the end of the East Corridor contained archive-tier information in the extreme. Nothing in it could be operationalized. Nothing in it changed the supply corridor situation, or the trajectory of the contested zone, or the resource deficit on the station, or the survival calculus that Hecht was still working through every morning. Nothing in that room was actionable. And yet he could not move. He thought about Seventh Voice. He thought about her voice in the command transmissions, that particular frequency, the reason humans had nicknamed her, and the way she had moved through tactical decisions with a clarity he had spent 2 years studying and had never fully replicated. He thought about the 14 months before her death during which she had, apparently, filed an acknowledgement chip in the Keth Central Honors Registry for a human doctor named Aruna Singh. He thought she did not do that because it was actionable. He thought she did it because he did not have the word. He had the shape of the word. He had the negative space it would occupy. He knew that it was not sentimentality because he had a word for that, and it was a word used with mild contempt in his culture. He knew that it was not tactical investment because there was no tactic here. He knew that it was not obligation because no Kethvar code required it. It was something else. He thought Seventh Voice was the finest mind I ever studied under, and in her final 14 months she did something my people do not have a word for. She tended something. She kept a record. She honored a weight that had no operational value and was never going to acquire any. He thought, and she was dead 11 days after orders arrived that said to stop doing that. He thought, and here, in a room full of things that a human crew kept for reasons they probably could not fully explain, is the record of the 8 months she spent being the kind of person who did that. He stood in the corridor outside the room and felt the weight of that through the wall, and it was not grief exactly, but it occupied the same space grief would occupy, and he let it. When he finally turned and walked back toward the medical bay, Dressel 3 steps behind him, he noticed that his hands, 8 fingers, jointed differently from human hands, built for grip strength and fine manipulation in equal measure. His hands were open at his sides, not in a fighting configuration, not in the neutral carry position he had defaulted to for his entire service life. Just open. He noted this and did not close them. Myra was at her station when he came back. She looked at him and then looked more carefully, the way she did when she was reading vital signs, except she had no scanner in her hand. She said, "Do you want to talk about it?" He said, "I want to understand something." She said, "Okay." He said, "The crew before you. They kept the Keth artifacts because the Keth Sereth unit and the human crew had a history, a shared 8 months. The artifacts were evidence of that." She said, "Yes." He said, "You kept them because they were there, and it seemed wrong to erase them, even though you had no history with any of the people involved." She said, "Yes." He said, "Why does it seem wrong to erase them? In operational terms, they consume space and have no function. The crew they memorialized are dead. The circumstances that created them cannot be recreated. Why does that matter?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Because they happened. The 8 months happened. The people in them were real. If we erase the evidence, it doesn't unhappen the thing. It just makes it easier to pretend it didn't." She paused. "And I don't want to live in a place where we pretend things didn't happen because they're inconvenient." He said, "Even if the thing that happened was the preliminary condition for a war." She said, "Especially then." She looked at him. "Because the thing that happened before the war was 2 crews of different species figuring out how to exist in proximity without killing each other. If that happened once, it can happen again. That's not a sentimental position. That's data." He looked at her for a long time. He said, "That is a very tactical argument." She said, "I have my moments." He said, "You are a surgeon who was assigned to a contested zone monitoring outpost, and you have been here for 18 months, and the station is undersupplied, and the co argues with you about your patience, and you kept a room full of things you didn't understand. He paused. You have more than moments. She looked down at her station. He thought she might be performing the human expression he had catalogued as uncomfortable with direct acknowledgement, and he found this interesting. She said, you should rest. The orbital fracture still shows heat on the scan. He said, I am not tired. She said, I know, rest anyway. He lay down on the medical surface. Above him, the pale curved ceiling. He thought about the room. He thought about the acknowledgement chip and the worn honor marker and the photograph of the human crew with the Keth artifact placed beside it, as if they belonged in the same frame. He thought, Aruna Singh filed the chip under Keth Honors Protocol. Seventh Voice filed a reciprocal chip in the Keth Central Registry for a human doctor. Both of them, independently, using their own culture systems, chose to make a formal record of a thing that had no operational value. He thought they were saying the same thing in two different languages. He thought the thing they were saying was, this happened and it mattered, and I want the record to reflect that someone thought so. He lay on the surface and looked at the ceiling and felt the weight of the room at the end of the east corridor, moving through him like a slow frequency, like the particular vibration of a ship's hull when the drives have been at full burn for a long time and the metal has been changed by it. He thought, I am going to tell Hecht. He thought, I am going to tell him everything. He told Hecht that evening. He told him about the supply corridor, the full picture, not the pieces they had extracted from his mission logs, but the actual architecture of the strategy, the points of redundancy, the places where disruption would matter and the places where it would only produce the appearance of disruption. He told him about the Keth command structure in this sector, the chain of authority, the realistic response timelines when his confirmation signal continued to transmit rather than going dark. Hecht listened without interrupting. He was good at that, Verath Kas had noticed. Whatever else he was a listener. When it was done, Hecht said, why are you telling me this? Verath Kas said, because I am calculating. Hecht said, calculate out loud. Verath Kas said, the supply corridor disruption has been ongoing for 11 months. During that time, this outpost has had no resupply. Your crew is reduced by attrition. Your resources are insufficient for extended engagement. If the contested zone continues to expand on its current trajectory, this station becomes indefensible within 4 months. Hecht said, I know. Verath Kas said, my command believes this station will fall without requiring active engagement. They are waiting. He paused. I believe they are wrong about the timeline, but not about the outcome if nothing changes. Hecht said, and you're telling me this because? Verath Kas said, because I have been here 13 days, and in 13 days I have learned that this outpost contains a room where someone kept the artifacts of a Keth unit that has been dead for 2 years. And I have learned that the doctor here fed me before she knew whether I would be dangerous. And I have learned that a crew of humans and a crew of Keth Sarath operated on this moon for 8 months without destroying each other, and that both of them apparently chose to keep a record of that. He stopped. My people say that the untranslatable word *Veth Karath refers to seeing clearly before meaning is applied. I have been trying to apply that concept to this situation. Hecht was quiet. Verath Kas said, what I see, when I try to see without meaning, is that 2 sets of beings have now found a way to exist in proximity on this moon without the conflict that was predicted. And I see that both times, the absence of conflict was initiated by a choice to treat a need as a need rather than an enemy as an enemy. Hecht said, that's a very philosophical argument for passing military intelligence to opposing forces. Verath Kas said, I am aware of that. Hecht said, why does it matter to you, personally, not the calculation, the reason under the calculation? Verath Kas was quiet for a moment. He said, because Seventh Voice was the finest mind I ever studied under. And she died 11 days after new orders arrived because someone on both sides of this conflict decided that what was happening on this moon was unsustainable, and the easiest solution was to end the people who were doing it. He paused. I do not want to be someone who made the same decision. Hecht looked at him for a long time. Then he said, "What do you need from me?" The negotiation took 12 days. Verathkos transmitted to Keth Command, and the transmissions were not comfortable. His commanding officer, a Kethvar first named Asathren, who had run 12 of their successful corridor missions from the command center and had never once been in range of actual enemy contact, treated his initial message as evidence of compromise, possibly coercion. Verathkos responded to this with the kind of methodical precision that had characterized every mission report he had ever filed. Here are the facts. Here is my assessment. Here is my recommendation. Here is my reasoning. Asathren sent back a silence that lasted 2 days. Then he sent a message that asked a single question: what do the humans want? Hecht, when Verathkos relayed this, said, "Resupply routes and 2 months of corridor access. After 2 months, we renegotiate." Verathkos transmitted this. The silence this time lasted 4 days. During those 4 days, Myra continued to treat his orbital fracture with twice daily scanning and updated the bone net. She continued to bring him food that was wrong in ways he had now cataloged extensively and accepted anyway. She continued to talk, not to him exactly but near him, in the way she had from the beginning, the running commentary of a person who thought best when they spoke, about the medical situation on the station, about which crew members were developing stress fractures in their work habits, about the recycler in Bay 3 that had been intermittent for 6 months, and which she had fixed twice, and which had broken again in a different location each time, as though it were engaged in a tactical evasion. On the 3rd day of the silence he said, "You are worried." She said, "A little." He said, "What outcome concerns you most?" She said, "That they say no, that they decide it's cleaner to just end this. End the station, end the conversation. That the people here were worth the price of something I can't see from here." She paused. "That the room at the end of the East Corridor becomes something that only I know about." He said, "If they say no, what will you do?" She said, "Keep treating my patients." A pause. "What will you do?" He said, "Whatever it is, that constitutes the same thing in my language." She looked at him. He said, "My people do not have a word for what you do, but I believe the action exists. I believe Seventh Voice performed it in 8 months on this moon. I believe the doctor before you performed it." He paused. "I am attempting to determine whether I am capable of it." She said, "What does it feel like from the inside?" He said, "Like calculating a trajectory and discovering that the answer is something you cannot achieve through calculation alone." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That sounds about right." On the 2nd night of the silence, he found he could not remain still. Dressel was off rotation. His replacement was a woman named Castle who was, if anything, more laconic than Dressel, and who had the particular quality of stillness that Verathkos associated with people who had decided long ago that the universe was going to do what it was going to do, and the only reasonable response was to wait it out. She walked 3 steps behind him through the permitted corridors without comment when he said he needed to move, and he did not explain further, and she did not ask. He walked the East Corridor twice. He walked the main corridor once. He stopped at the observation window and looked at the gas giant, amber in the black, and thought about transmission signals traveling at the speed of physics toward a command center where a first-rank officer was deciding whether to let an unexpected negotiation proceed or simply to end it. He thought about the word Veth Karath, the condition of existing before meaning is applied, and tried to apply it to his own situation. He tried to see the facts without the weight of what they implied. The facts were: 1 monitoring station, undersupplied and undermanned. One captured Kethvar warrior with a hairline orbital fracture, healed to approximately 80%. One partial negotiation framework, not yet agreed to. One command officer weighing the politics of allowing a field operative to operate outside standard protocol. Silence on the transmission channel. He tried to see those facts without meaning. What he saw instead was the room at the end of the east corridor. He walked toward it, and Castle followed without comment, and he stood outside the door and put his hand flat against it. The wall was composite and cool and hummed faintly with the station's ambient systems. Through it, nothing. The room was sealed and dark, and the things inside it did not change whether anyone was watching them or not. He thought that is the point. He thought the things in that room do not require an observer to exist. The 8 months happened. The acknowledgement chips exist in 2 separate registries on 2 separate sides of this war. The photograph has the chip beside it. None of that requires anyone to be in the room. He thought, that is what my people do not understand about keeping. My people believe that a thing only has weight while it is being actively carried. The moment you set it down, it loses its weight. We do not believe in the weight of things left alone in the dark. He thought, but the weight is there anyway. He turned from the door. The woman from the corridor was there. He had not heard her approach. She moved quietly with the careful efficiency of someone managing chronic pain, and she was standing approximately 4 meters away, not advancing, not retreating, just present. She was in off-rotation clothing, something casual, a cup of something warm in her hands. She was looking at him. He looked at her. She said, "You were there." Her voice was flat and she did not qualify this. "The corridor campaign, your unit." He said, "Yes." She said, "My partner's name was Dina's. He was on a resupply shuttle, 6 other people on that shuttle." He said nothing. She said, "I'm not going to tell you I forgive you. I don't know if I believe in that." She looked at her cup. "But I've been watching you for 3 days, and you move like someone who's lost people." He said, "Yes." She said, "Okay." She looked at him directly. "I needed you to know that I know that I'm not pretending you're something simpler than you are." He said, "I am not going to tell you that the mission was wrong. I am not going to tell you that the losses were not my responsibility. I planned 12 operations, and 8 of them directly disrupted resupply to this sector." She said, "I know." He said, "I am telling you this because I believe you are entitled to the accurate version of what I am." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "The accurate version of what you are is someone who told our commanding officer a piece of intelligence that could have saved 17 people's lives if we'd had it 3 months ago." He said, "Yes." She said, "Do you understand what I'm telling you?" He said, "That the accounting is complicated." She said, "That's one way to say it." She looked at her cup again. "The doctor says you're trying to make this stop. The war, or at least this piece of it." He said, "I am attempting to contribute to conditions that might allow that." She said, "Why?" He said, "Because." He stopped. He thought about the room behind him, the weight through the wall. He said, "Because someone before me tried to build something in this specific place, and it cost them everything, and I have been thinking about whether the thing they built has value if no one continues it." She was quiet. He said, "I think it does. I think the room at the end of this corridor has weight whether anyone is in it or not. I think Seventh Voice's acknowledgement chip has weight whether anyone reads it or not. But I also think that is not the same as continuing the thing." He paused. "I am choosing to continue it." She looked at him for a long time. Her expression did not warm exactly, but something in it shifted, not toward welcome, not yet, but away from the particular coldness that is not anger but its residue. She said, "My name is Vash." He said, "Verathkas." She said, "I know." She turned and walked back toward the crew quarters. At the corner she stopped without turning around. She said, "I'm not going to be your friend. I want you to know that. He said, I understand. She said, but I'm not going to stand in the corridor looking like I want you dead either, because that's a pause. That's not who I want to be. She went around the corner. He stood in the corridor outside the room for a while longer. Castle 3 steps behind him said nothing at all. He thought, this is what Myra meant. The accounting is complicated. The accurate version of things is complicated, but the accurate version is the only one worth having. He turned and walked back toward the medical bay. Osithren's answer arrived on the 4th day, and it was not the answer anyone had expected. He did not say yes. He said, send me the records of Keth-Sarath 9th Advance. Varath-Kas spent 2 hours composing the response. He compiled everything he knew about the 9th Advance, their mission history, their engagement record, their final assignment, the precise chain of command that had delivered the orders that had ended them. He attached no recommendation. He transmitted the file and waited. The response this time came in 6 hours, not days. Osithren said, I did not know what happened to the 9th. The official record listed them as combat loss. No detail. A pause in the transmission. The doctor's name in the human records, Aruna Singh. There is an acknowledgement chip in the Keth Central Honors Registry, filed by 7th Voice 14 months before her death. It has no recipient name. It has a description. Another pause. The description says, the one who treated Kethvar Turathsal when we had no surgery capability and asked nothing in return except that we keep the peace as long as we could. A long silence on the transmission. Then we will discuss corridor access. The agreement took another 3 days to negotiate and was not complete when Varath-Kas was scheduled to return to Keth Command for formal debriefing. The corridor access was partial, conditional, and required review in 60 days. The resupply route was a single line, not the 3 Hecht had asked for. There were concessions on both sides that neither side was comfortable calling concessions. Hecht said it was a start. Varath-Kas said, my assessment also. They were in the East Corridor, at the observation window, the morning of his departure. The gas giant was at a particular angle, the amber bands catching the light from the system's star, and the moon's surface below them had a quality of stillness that he had come to associate with early station cycle. Myra was there too, standing slightly apart the way she sometimes did when she was not sure of the shape of a moment. He said to her, you will keep the room. It was not a question. She said yes. He said, when I return to command, I will enter the full record of Keth-Sarath 9th Advance into the Honors Registry. Under their designation not as combat loss, he paused, I will include the notation about the human crew, about Aruna Singh. She said she would have liked that. He said, I did not know her. She said, I know, I meant you doing it, she would have liked that. He looked at the landscape through the window. The gray stone and impact craters and the distant arc of the gas giant, banded in amber and rust, a place that predated meaning and would outlast it, and between the landscape and the light something that looked, briefly, like the absence of war. He said, in my culture, we do not have a word for the person who tends what is left behind. She said, I know. He said, I think we should have one. She said, what would it mean? He said, it would mean, the one who understood that the dead still have weight, that what they did still occupies space, that to erase them is to pretend the space was always empty. She said very quietly, yes. He said, asterisk, and the word would also mean, the one who, when they find something they do not understand, does not destroy it, but waits until understanding is possible. She looked at him. He said, this is what your people do that my people do not understand. You keep what has not been explained. You wait for the explanation, rather than deciding the unexplained has no value. She said, I thought you said you don't understand why we do that. He said, I said it was one of the things we did not understand. I have been here 17 days. A pause. I think I understand it now. She said, what changed? He said, you fed me before you knew whether I would be dangerous. She said, I told you you were injured. That's just what you do. He said, yes. He looked at her. That is exactly the thing I am talking about. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, will you come back after the debriefing? He said, the negotiation requires an intermediary. Asathren will not want to manage direct communication. I am the logical choice. She said, that's a very calculation-heavy way to say yes. He said, I am Kethvar. We do not say yes directly. She made the small upward movement at the corners of her mouth that he had identified as a human smile. He said, I am aware that this is a smile. I have studied your facial expressions. She said, good. That means you know this is the one. That means I'm glad. He looked at the landscape one more time. The gray stone and the amber arc, the deep wordless age of a place that predated both of them and would outlast both of them, and the station behind them full of people who were scared and short on resources and had nonetheless managed, twice now, to choose the stranger option, the impractical one, the one that did not calculate cleanly and could not be defended easily, the option of treating a need as a need. He turned away from the window. He said, in approximately 60 days, when the corridor access review occurs, I will require someone to walk me to the observation window again. She said, I'll be here. Dressel, 3 steps behind them, said nothing at all. They walked back through the station together, through the east corridor, and past the room at the end of it that was full of things that had been kept, and the weight of those things was present even through the wall, a particular density that Verathkas had not had a word for 17 days ago and now almost did. He did not have it yet. But he was getting there. The shuttle was ready. The departure corridor smelled of recycled air and metal, and the faint biological trace of human that he had stopped noticing sometime around day 4, which surprised him when he noticed that he had stopped noticing it. Hecht was there, straight-backed, efficient, extending his hand in the human gesture of agreement. Verathkas took it. The pressure was exactly calibrated, not too firm, not too soft. He had studied the gesture. He knew it was a statement about the absence of weapons in the right hand, a contract written in the muscle memory of a species that had been shaking hands since before they reached the stars. He thought they carried this all the way out here, this small gesture about empty hands. They brought it across light years and they still do it. He thought, we do not have the equivalent, we should. The shuttle door sealed behind him. Through the small viewport, as the station shrank away and the gray moon fell behind him, and the gas giant's amber arc rotated slowly in the black, he could see the observation window, just barely, just the faint yellow glow of it against the station's gray hull. He watched it until it was too small to see. Then he turned to face forward. He had work to do.